Did you know that the Disney movie Pocahontas is actually based on a real-life person that once lived that was also known as Pocahontas? However, the real-life story of Pocahontas was not as beautiful as depicted in the Disney movie. The real life of Pocahontas was actually very dark. In case you don't know the true story of Pocahontas, I'm going to share it with you. Her real birth name was actually Matoaka. However, her nickname was in fact Pocahontas, which meant the playful one. And of course, she was a Native American girl from the Powhatan tribe. In fact, she was just a little girl from the age of 10 or 12. And this is where the dark aspect of her life story comes into play. When she was around 10 or 12, that's when the English settlers began to arrive to the region of her people. In the movie, she is depicted as a young woman, and then here comes John Smith, a young white man. But the reality was that she was just a little girl. And John Smith was a full-blown grown man, possibly in his 30s or 40s. And in the Disney movie, two people come together and fall in love. And they bring two peoples together. But in the real life, John Smith actually kidnapped Pocahontas as a little girl because he wanted to use Pocahontas to manipulate that tribe, because Pocahontas was actually the daughter of the chief of that tribe. And so John Smith kidnapped her. And once he used her for ransom and also to manipulate the chief, then he took her to England, where he left her there to become a servant and get impregnated as a little girl. And she lived the rest of her life as a servant in England, where she eventually passed away due to pneumonia. And this is a true story of what today you know as Pocahontas. The truth is that there was never ever falling in love and a people coming together. The real life story of Pocahontas was a little girl that got kidnapped, held for ransom, got taken to another continent, became a servant, and passed away at the very young age of 20. And I believe it's very important to share the real story of Pocahontas, because not only Disney and Hollywood have a very bad habit of romanticizing what really happened to Native Americans, but also white historians have the tendency to romanticize invading a people, graping a people, the genocide of a people, the ethnic cleansing of a people, and the colonization of a people. They make it seem like white people arrived to the Americas and married Native Americans, created peace with Native Americans. But the reality is that when Europeans arrived to the Americas, they pretended to be the friends of Native Americans. The gifts that the Europeans brought to the Native Americans were contaminated with diseases and illnesses that Native Americans had no immunity for. So it was the gifts of the white man to the Native Americans that actually wiped a very large percentage of the Native American population. You see, what a lot of Hollywood movies written and directed by the white man, they make it seem like these brave soldiers came from Europe and began to fight and conquer. But the reality is that they arrived. And when they realized that they couldn't defeat a lot of the tribes in the Americas, they instead pretended to be their friends and offered Native Americans gifts that had diseases. And slowly but surely, the population of Native Americans began to decrease lower and lower. And when it was low enough, then they began to attack. Believe it or not, some of the first Europeans that arrived to the Americas actually kept journals with them. Columbus was one of those people. And in full detail, they described what they saw when they first arrived to the Americas. And if you do some research and look for some of these journals and you read what the first Europeans saw when they got here, you will realize and learn that a lot of the history books that you read are so opposite of what the journals written by the first Europeans that arrived described when they first got here and what they saw. See, history books in public schools describe Native Americans as savages, uncivilized. They had nothing going for themselves. But the journals of the first Europeans described arriving and being left in awe at the beautiful civilizations that the Native Americans had built. Native Americans had universities, advanced mathematics, science. They had underground plumbing already going on, advanced architecture, agriculture, and believe it or not, indigenous people were already performing surgeries when the first Europeans arrived here. One of the things that is described in the Journal of Cortez is that he learned that the native people generally bathe twice a day. Meanwhile, the first Europeans that arrived would go on for a whole week and not bathe. In fact, it is described that when the first Europeans arrived to the Americas, one of the first things that the natives discovered about them is that they really stunk because their hygiene was very, very poor. And one of the first things that the natives did was go clean them because they stunk. A lot of people always ask me, Ricardo, what books do you read? And I'm going to recommend one book to you. I myself have written a book, but it's a novel. It's called Los Indios. I will link it in the comment section. However, I'm also going to recommend, if you ever get the time, read that book. Because the history books that are found in schools were written to demonize Native Americans, depict them as savages, cannibals, in order for white people to be able to justify oppressing a people. Because if there's something to learn about white people, is that they always demonize a people that they oppress. In other words, we first have to make them look like people who deserve to be mistreated and to be seen as subhumans. Because if we could accomplish to show the world that these people are no good, then we could get away with oppressing them and doing what we want with them. This is something that white people still do today with their mass media. They use the media to demonize Black American people, Hispanics, so that every time they systemically oppress these people, it's kind of like, well, I mean, yeah, we're oppressing these people, but I mean, look at them. And that's why it's important for white people to control the narrative. Because as long as white people control the narrative, they're going to get away with committing all the crimes that they do.